Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got a really awesome guest on today. He's an independent UX researcher and the managing founder of the Space in Between, New Zealand's only specialist evaluative UX research practice and world-class human-centered research and innovation lab. Please join me in welcoming Brendan Jarvis. Welcome.
Hey, Thomas, great to be with you today.
Are you ready for 20 questions?
Oh, most definitely. Let's do it.
Great. Question one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for covering some of that in the introduction. I suppose when it comes down to it, the core of what I do is to help people understand what it's like for their customers to use complex software, the software they've created. So I help them understand where the challenges people are facing in their software are and why they exist. And that's the main area that I help people with, and usually that's enterprise clients, big complex enterprise software. And I've also recently started helping some enterprise clients to design or redesign their existing research programs. And that's been an interesting new evolution of my work in recent years. And I'm certainly enjoying that different level of approaching user experience and making a difference in my client organizations.
Great. And just to know for the audience, you guys, this is episode 299. So the next few episodes are going to be a bit of a splash. So look out for these. Question two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Yeah, I thought about this for a while, and I've actually, if I may, I've identified, I think, two things. And the first of those is that people remember how you made them feel, not exactly what you did. And I think that's something that I always bear in mind when I'm working with other people is not to make it sound overly glossy or that there's nothing substantial in the work that's being done, but I really do put that front of mind when I'm working with my clients. I suppose I don't really typically have a lot of colleagues as such, but my clients that I'm helping, and it's to remember that I'm also there to create a good experience by delivering work in a way that they feel really positive about how the work's happened, not just what was delivered. And the second thing is that while it's kind of perhaps a common understanding, people say don't sweat the small stuff. I think it's really important to sweat the small stuff, particularly when it comes to design, and I suppose more specifically in my area, which is UX research, and a lot of that research is evaluative. So I'm looking at existing products, and like I mentioned before, those products are often in complex enterprise spaces, and the details, the small stuff, they really do matter in the way that you frame your insights and can guide product teams to better understand what it's like for people to use their software and how they can make it better.
Great, I love that. Okay, so question three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
People are fascinating. And when you combine people with complex software, it's almost like a never ending series of rooms that you can go into, where each of the rooms are as interesting, if not more interesting, than the previous one. And I can't see it ever not being a really interesting blend of people, technology, and challenges to work on. I don't think the work's ever going to go away. And I think also from a personal point of view, it really suits my temperament. So my work, roughly speaking, I would say is about 80% solo, where I'm able to get into deep work, and 20% together, where I suppose, conveying quite often what it is that I've learned, trying to help people better understand what that is so they can put improvements into practice, getting projects or studies or initiatives stood up at the beginning. But that's really only about 20% of what I do. And that suits me. I really value that split. And I also think when it comes to being uh, on the tools, so to say, the work requires a really great blend of both people skills and analytical skills. Like if you're listening to this and you've ever done a user interview, or you've run a usability test, or whatever it is, a workshop, design workshop, or anything like that, you'll understand that the field that we work in really brings those two things together in a way that is deeply rewarding. So you get that face time, you get all the wonderful insights, and the side of things where you can't simulate when you bring people together, but you also then get to go away and think deeply about what it is that you've seen, or heard, or both, and what it means. And that really suits me too.
Nice. So some people struggle with number four, and the question is, what does your future look like?
Hmm. So professionally, I thought about this in two ways. I thought about it professionally and personally. So professionally, I think when it comes to the types of studies that I'm doing, much the same. However, there's going to be an increasing role that AI will play. And I think that's coming from executive leadership on down into design and product orgs, that there's this expectation, and this is actually not a new thing. There's always been this expectation. I suppose it's just taken on different forms or words to describe what the expectation is, but this expectation of better, faster. And I can see my enterprise clients becoming increasingly focused on things like how quickly can we get insights, and how inexpensively can we get insights. Now, it's not to say that quality isn't important in this space. I don't hear quality of insight as having quite the same emphasis recently as speed and cost. And personally, uh, I'm actually considering making a move with my family to Australia, which is would be an exciting new chapter. That would be in terms of thinking about place, which may come up later in the conversation. That would be a distinct difference in place from where I am currently in New Zealand to Australia. And I'm also mulling on a project, which I'm not sure exactly what form it's going to take, whether it might be a book or a content platform or maybe a mix of both, but something that helps parents teach their kids about money. And that's been inspired by my conversations I've been having with my 7-year-old, my son, and trying to structure some age appropriate ways of helping him to think through what money means, and how at that age it can make sense, and you can make it something that is not scary, and something that is useful for him as he develops, as he grows, as he becomes an adult.
Great. So five we say is unique to the show, and you touched on it a bit, but the question is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly talk about all the wonderful vistas available in New Zealand, and the tourism and movies and all the other things that I suppose New Zealand hangs its hat on the international stage. But I think if I was to boil it down, I think New Zealand makes me, when I'm dealing with most of my clients, which are overseas, seem more interesting than I probably otherwise would. So that's great for me. But it's certainly it's a funny little country down the bottom of the world with 5 million people, and we have a strange accent which seems to go down well. And the other thing is that the place is quite geographically isolated. So New Zealand is, I think, one of, if not the closest country to Antarctica, perhaps with Argentina nudging us out a little there. So you can't get much further away from all the wonderful things and not so wonderful things that are going on in the world. And COVID, dare I say it, when it came around, was both initially a curse, and then it became, I think it, to not to try and put rose tinted glasses on COVID. I mean, it was obviously a terrible time, but it did open people's minds up to working with people down the bottom end of the world like I am, more so than they had perhaps in the past. And so that was really a large shift in the work that I was doing and who I was doing it for. And while I'm not thankful for COVID, I am thankful for the mindset shift that it enabled in people that wanted to work with people like me.
Great. Okay, six. You're starting from the beginning. What advice do you give your former younger self?
Yeah, such a good question. The first thing would be to get a more grounded classical higher education and do that first. So I'm talking about like I really wanted to study history and I didn't do that. I opted to study technology and business straight off. And I think that was doing myself a disservice. I think that I felt a lot of pressure self-imposed early on to get out there and do something. And while I'm not suggesting that drive is was something that hasn't served me well, it certainly has. But I find myself now later in life going back to those subjects like history and philosophy that intellectually engaged me, but that I didn't give the time that I perceived I didn't have back then. So I would definitely do that. And the other thing that I do is I take some more time in my professional career. Now, just to give you a bit of background context, so I worked for a design agency for I think about 4 years before I started the space in between, which went through various iterations of digital production, full scale design development, and maintenance, and then UX research as its core, and only sort of focused now over the last 16 years. And I would explore the business model that sat behind the work more aggressively, and I would be more open to experimenting with that. And the reason for that is things change rapidly. Personally, for me, when I got married, bought a house, and had kids, now that's not uncommon. Of course, people's risk tolerance goes down. And I think that if I was going to go back in time, that I would definitely be a bit more brave, a bit bolder when it came to exploring the model behind the work that I love and enjoy.
Great. So what's a day in your life like?
Family is really important to me, and I bookend my day with family as regularly as I can, which is near on every day. Um, I'm in charge of food in the house, so I get up, I make breakfast for the family, and eat that with family. I'm also very much fitness focused. I find, given the type of sedentary work that I'm largely doing, and the largely solo bend there that I talked about. Most of it's 80% solo work that I really need for my mental health and my physical health to get out and do things. So I love putting on the boxing gloves and going down to my local gym and just spending an hour there most regularly. And then I do a work sprint in the morning, and I would say that's roughly about 3 hours. And then, of course, you got to get up and move. And so I make a big effort to go out for a nice walk through the Botanic Gardens, which are just behind us here in Wellington. I find that's an excellent form of mental and physical therapy. So I get out and amongst the gardens and really enjoy that. And then I come back for a second work sprint before preparing dinner for the family and having conversations with them.
Great. So eight is about lifelong learning. It's a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of political podcasts, actually, I find is a really great way of keeping in touch with what people are thinking. And that's across the spectrum. So, to give you an example, a couple of podcasts in my queue are The Ezra Klein Show. And then there's a British podcast called Trigonometry, which is another podcast that I listen to. I love those podcasts that have those rich conversations, the interview style, but really long form, rich conversational topics that I can listen to when I'm out on my walks and get more in touch with different perspectives across the whole political spectrum. And I also read regularly. As I mentioned a little earlier, I'm returning to my interests, philosophy and history. So I've been reading most recently Epictetus's discourses and also the Tao Te Ching. Hopefully, I'm saying that correct. And trying to make sense of what that means, which is quite different to Western philosophy, and I'm certainly not a philosophy academic, so I'm kind of making this up as I go along in terms of how I think about what I'm reading. But I really enjoy those perspectives from the past as much as I enjoy the perspectives or the political perspectives from the present.
Great. So 9 is about tools, and you talked a bit about this, but what tools do you use? Do you use both digital and analog tools?
Yes, I still make use of the stack of post-it notes that I'm looking at right here on my desk as much as I make use of the computer. I would say, though, that most of the tooling is actually pretty basic. So, if you think about post-its and pens, that doesn't get much simpler than that. But when it comes to the screen, I'd have to say most of it's actually Word and Excel, um, which is really not that exciting. But they're really staples, I suppose, of getting any kind of work done when you're working in enterprise software. I've also been making healthy use of ChatGPT as a thought partner. That has been my preferred LLM to work with. I've dipped my toes in a few others, but I keep coming back to it. I don't know if it's just the preference that I've formed because it's the first one that I really used in depth, but I've certainly enjoyed seeing it progress and just how much utility it can provide to me in my day to day. And then outside of that, there's some research specific or design specific tools that I've been using. One in particular that I'd like to call out is a platform called Great Question, which I've really been enjoying using for some recent studies.
Great. So halfway number 10, how do you deal with work-life or life-work balance?
Really badly for about 90% of my career. I certainly over indexed on work, and that felt like the right thing to do at the time. And then I would say it was about 6 or 7 years ago. So, to give you some context, I'm 41 now. So, maybe in my mid 30s, I started to realize that I needed to change the approach I was taking and also change the nature of the problems that I was trying to help people to solve. So I did that, and I've certainly become much better at managing professional, personal boundaries and compartmentalizing work so that it doesn't bleed over into even dream time, which it has done occasionally for me, or more than occasionally, if I'm being honest. I also find, like I mentioned, getting out for walks and fitness has really helped me to deal with the professional, I wouldn't call it a burden, but the professional obligations that I have taken on. I think that those many bursts of fitness throughout the day help me to completely disconnect from what's going on in professional life. And I think also adding to this, having kids, of which I have two now, has really changed my perspective on what's important. And it has forced me to consider alternative endings, if you like, to my life and what I would be willing to live with. And something that I decided that I would not be willing to live with was having a fantastic career, but missing out on my boys growing up. I just feel like that is a trade or a trade-off that I'm just not willing to make. And so as part of that, we have some things in our family that are, I think, important for being in the moment. And one of those things is that we don't have, my wife and I don't bring our cell phones to the table. So we don't have any devices near us when we're in conversation together or when we're with our boys. So that's one of those things that we do to deal with the work-life balance.
Nice. Okay, 11. If you weren't doing what you do now, what might you be doing?
Yeah, I'd probably be a teacher. I thought about this. I think probably at an all boys school. And the reason for that is I see both from my own experience growing up. Um, I've grew up in a family, was raised by my mum on her own, and I've certainly seen both within that experience and also more widely in society the struggle that many boys who they grow up to become men and not always with the right skills or the right ways of framing the experiences that they'll encounter. And I think if I wasn't doing what I was doing now, I'd be a teacher at an all boys school, possibly secondary school, and I'd like to help young men frame things like I mentioned earlier, money and finance, and perhaps I'd focus on sport and how to channel some of those masculine tendencies in positive ways,
Mm.
as well as other life skills like public speaking and things that can help. No, I mean obviously not just boys, but if I was going to pick a focus, that would be mine. Help people to have healthier relationships, both with themselves and with others as they become adults.
Great. And what would you not like to do with your career?
Yeah, this is a toss up between being a manager again and being an employee. I never say never. I certainly would in the future, perhaps when life's at a different stage, want to be a manager again. But what I would never want to be is an employee who has to fit work in around dozens of meetings a week. I just see some of my colleagues that I work with and my client organizations really struggle with meeting culture. And I'm really thankful that I'm able to take a more surgical approach to the work that I do in the sense that I'm not essential for most meetings and intentionally so. Um, that's not to say I'd never be an employee. I just wouldn't want to be an employee that was beholden to meeting culture. And I think that I'm much better, more productive, and happier, and of more value to the people I'm working with when I have that time to focus and I can really get stuck into the details.
Great. And do you have a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Yes. So this is a recent one from what I've been reading, and it's from Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher. And something he supposedly said was, don't seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly. And for me, this isn't a passive acceptance of what happens to you, but it's a recognition that you have a decision or the agency to decide how you're going to respond, if not in the moment, shortly after to those things. And I really like that, particularly in a world that feels increasingly, if you let it, out of your control. And that this for me is quite a useful quote to come back to, particularly when something surprising happens that perhaps wasn't top of my list for something to enjoy or something to happen. I quite like this way of framing the events in the world and my role in deciding what they mean for me.
Great. And do you have a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Yes, and this is something I see in children, and I don't know where it comes from, and I certainly see it in adults as well, and have seen it in myself, particularly when something's difficult, and that's the word can't. I think it's such a dangerous and disingenuous and self-deluding word. Now, it's not to say that everyone can do everything that they set their mind to, but you certainly can't achieve anything if you decide that you can't even take the first step towards it. And I think it's a really dangerous and debilitating word that we should do our best, not in the Orwellian sense, but to scrub from our daily usage.
Great. So you're choosing one word to describe yourself. What word do you choose?
That word would be disciplined. And I think of someone who embodies this. That if I was going to say, I don't really have many heroes, but if I was going to pick a hero that's alive today, I'll pick a boxer. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. His name's Alexander Usyk. He's a Ukrainian boxer. He's currently, I think, the world's greatest heavyweight. And he says that I don't have motivation, I have discipline. Motivation is temporary. And I couldn't agree with him more.
Great. And what keeps you up at night?
Probably this is related to the podcast that I listened to, but I would say the increasing polarization that we see in our Western democracies,
Mhm.
and also the risk that seems never more likely that we're going to end up in a great power conflict at some time within my lifetime. And that personally, I don't know if it doesn't scare me for my own sake, but it's certainly something that I don't relish for the sake of my children, or anyone else's children that may be caught up in that. I just feel like if there's one thing, which I know this is not anywhere near my ability to control, but if there's one thing that I could control, if I had a magic wand, it would be to diffuse or derail or misdirect the current track it feels like we're traveling on.
Mm. Great. And final stretch here. What's a dream you're chasing?
Well, this one could be more like a nightmare. I suppose it would depend on whether or not I actually pursue it. But I have been toying with entering politics in New Zealand at the national level, sometime in my early 50s. And that's a wee while away. As I said, I'm 41. I just turned 41. But I feel like any decision like that needs to be made with a lot of consideration. I think you really have to understand what you're getting into and see what the difference is that you perceive you could make versus the reality that you might be able to achieve. And so I've given myself a 10-year horizon to figure out just what that public contribution may be, and do it at a time when I'm able to focus on giving it my 100%, or at least very much close to. And I definitely don't want to do that while my boys are young.
Great. And 18, what inspires you?
Yeah, so I'll come back to philosophy here. I think the most inspirational figure in my life has been a figure who's long dead, and that's a gentleman called Seneca. I think he was Nero's advisor, which, don't judge him on Nero. He certainly, Nero wasn't an upstanding individual as far as emperors of Rome go, but Seneca has written so many just really beautiful, insightful, deeply human letters and essays that I often just find myself having to put the book down and have a really good think about what he's saying, or returning to certain passages and rereading them just because they're so, and of course it's not in the original Latin, but just the way that they've been translated is, some of the translations are so beautiful in terms of the way that he has strung his thoughts together and the language he's used to describe them. I haven't really had that before with any author, and he's certainly someone that's been very inspirational to me.
Great. And last couple here, number 19, any advice you'd like to share?
Yeah, if you haven't read any books lately, please read one. I think that there's so much good, not just in the content, and of course, the choice of content is entirely individual, but just the meditative release that reading a book, reading something that's longer than 50 words can have in your life. So definitely recommend reading something, anything, as long as you can get your head into it. And also get off your devices. And if you have kids, I think that's particularly important. Um, Encourage them to get off them too, so you can actually spend time together as opposed to alone together. I think there's a really big distinction between those two ways of spending time. And I just see in so many people's lives the corrosive influence that smartphones have had and other devices have had, um, almost medicating ourselves and future generations in such a way that we're so disconnected from each other. So being present, talking with other people, and not having the technology close at hand is something that can add a lot, I feel, to people's lives. Life's not a research session. You certainly don't get to watch the video afterwards. And I think if people could bear that in mind, that we'd have better conversations, and a better community, a better culture.
Great. And finally, number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you and what's our call to action?
Yes. So you can find me on LinkedIn if you search for Brendan Jarvis. That's Jarvis, just like the AI in Iron Man. Or you can visit my website, which is The Space in Between. .co.nz. That's the space in between.co.nz.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining today. It's great to connect to New Zealand and to hear all your aspirations. I'm very excited for you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Thomas. It's been a real pleasure.